Alright everyone, secondary school pupils are being taught that Joan of Arc was non-binary. Lesson plans produced for English language students aged between 11 and 14 include the claim that Joan of Arc is today considered by some people to have been non-binary. This Joan of Arc wasn't actually a woman idea is not even new news. I've seen it around for a couple of years actually. It comes up whenever there's a quiet, genocide-free spell in the weirdo community. So this story really reminds me of the narrative, I don't know if you lot have seen it, the narrative about Kurt Cobain. They say that he's a trans woman because he wore a dress on stage a few times to be edgy. I loved Nirvana when I was growing up, but as far as I'm concerned, Kurt Cobain never ever thought he was somehow not a man just because he put on a dress. He knew he was a man and he put on a dress anyway. I saw it more of a so what, I can wear what I want statement rather than a guess what, I'm a woman now revelation. You know, these weirdos will grab onto anything and rewrite it, and that's the point. This isn't the first time or the first person who's been posthumously, I think that's the word, transitioned by the weirdo cult. So as we all know, or we may be aware by now, that there's this bizarre narrative floating around that Joan of Arc, the young teenage female warrior saint who led France to victory in the 15th century, was somehow non-binary. And for those of you who don't know what non-binary is, it is a bullshit, made-up term to describe bland, empty narcissists who have to borrow their entire personality from trending Pinterest boards and anime porn. This weirdo community insists that non-binary actually means a person who has no biological sex or who can change biological sex multiple times a day at will, usually depending on their mood. It honestly really is that ridiculous. Some of them, if they're watching this, although I don't think they are, but if they were to watch this, they would argue against my interpretation of non-binary and say that
we have never claimed anyone changes sex. What we're talking about is gender.
Ignore that. It's always about biological sex. They claim that gender is a social construct, which means it's actually made up. Then they claim that they have to change their birth certificate and passport to the opposite sex. And then they claim that we have to pretend that they actually are the opposite sex. And then before you know it, men are demanding access to women's spaces and demanding to be allowed to compete in women's sports as women. Additionally, we now have teenage girls having their breasts removed. So if this isn't about biological sex, why are you amputating healthy body parts in an attempt to claim to be the opposite sex? And why do you need to falsify your legal document to say that you are the opposite sex? So ultimately, this
we're talking about gender, not sex
argument is also bollocks. I'd go as far as to say almost everything these people say is complete bollocks. But let's not get derailed because I am full of distractions today. I'm unbelievably distracted.
What? What's going on now?
Who? What? Who's this?
What?
Who? What was this?
We are living in a moment where there's activist teachers and activist nutters, same thing, who believe this ridiculous idea that Joan of Arc was somehow non-binary, or if they don't believe it, they're willing to peddle it. And they believe that it should be taught in schools as if it is a historical fact. Spoiler alert, it's not. It's stupid. It's a stupid ideological attempt to rebrand a female historical icon into something more interesting, more modern, more cool, more amazing, as if a young woman, practically a teenage girl, leading a whole country into a victory during a 100 years war isn't enough. It isn't enough because she's a woman. As if being a young woman during an era when life was hard and life was cheap, and if you're lucky enough to survive being born in the first place, and if you're lucky enough to survive random, weird and bizarre childhood diseases, if you're lucky enough to survive childhood starvation, if you're lucky enough to survive an untimely childhood death by freaky incidents like falling off a tree or stumbling down a well to your ghastly fate as a young woman in the 1400s, you could end up burned at the stake for heresy during a 100-year war. But hey, that's not interesting enough. Let's not focus on anything like that. What really matters is whether or not Joan of Arc was
non-binary.
For fuck's sake. Can't believe it. Well, I can, because I'm used to it. I'm used to it now, guys. So I'm not that shocked. I just think it's absolutely mental. Speaking of mental, Joan of Arc herself was probably a bit mental, but that's what I mean. Joan of Arc herself is already interesting as fuck. From an early age, she claimed to have vision and to be able to speak to God. Can you imagine that though? She was just like this little girl in a tiny French village, telling everyone she's hearing divine voices from God, saints. The whole heavenly squad was dialing up her mental Wi-Fi, telling her to kick the English out of France during the 100 Years' War. I don't know how common that was for children back then, but if one of my nieces and nephews said that to me, I'd be taking all their smarties away from them and I'd be giving them a chamomile tea while I text their parents and I'd be like, your kids have gone wild.
What do you want?
Can I buy a famous artist Birdie Rose Arrest Her t-shirt and a Make Resilience Cool Again t-shirt, a Lucky Dip sticker package, a sardine ice cream, 2 beers and chips with jelly on top?
No, this is the toy shop.
What? I didn't know it was a toy shop. And get this, Joan of Arc was only 17 when she convinced the French king to let her lead an entire army. I don't think people really understand just how insane that is. This 17-year-old girl, or young woman, was leading an entire army full of beardy bro men. Absolutely insane, the kind of strong sense of self and character she must have had. Look, when I was 17, I was ripping my jeans across the knee, playing Snake on my Nokia phone, and then spending hours picking the right tune for my MySpace page and still living on Dip Dabs and Blue Panda Pop. When Joan of Arc was 17, she was dressed in armour, she rallied troops, she won battles like the Siege of Orleans, and she basically became a legend. An actual legend, to the point where hundreds of years later, we all still know her name. But then again, I reckon 17 wasn't considered young back then like it is today. Back then, 17 was probably considered like middle-aged, since most people didn't live past the age of 35. So even 30 would have been a pensioner for sure. So I don't think they saw her as a 17-year-old kid the way we would. Back then, they probably saw her as a grown woman. This blatant trying to erase and rewrite this amazing bit of history, which I think is nothing short of atrocious, despicable. But then again, this is what woke is about these days. Everything has to be rewritten how the comrades of the commie death cult want it to be. And I know that sounds dramatic, but it's true. That's why you see the likes of Horrible Histories, who last year tried to insinuate that black people built the Stonehenge, and I think they even went as far as to imply, or at least leave the audience open to interpreting, that white people had colonised England. Absolutely insane.
What? What's going on now?
Who? What? Who's this?
What?
Who? What was this?
Anyway, I remember the writers justifying their historical revisionism by saying something like, we were just trying to be nice. I don't personally think it's nice to anybody to lie about the facts, especially when it comes to history, just to make some people who were not a part of it feel better. Can you imagine if this happened anywhere else? Like, imagine going to Japan and rewriting their history so that all the children's books claim that it was white people who did the great things in Japan. Yeah, judo was invented by a white bloke called Dave. Oh, and sushi was invented by a white woman called Susan. No one would tolerate it, and we shouldn't tolerate it either. For some reason, us Westerners have become proper wet fish when it comes to being bullied and pushed around by these unbelievably low quality morons being peddled out of the universities. It is shameful. It's like actually embarrassing. We shouldn't be okay with the schools teaching kids things that are not true. Simply on the basis that, well, number one, it's not true, but number two, schools should be about education, not indoctrination. Joan of Arc was eventually captured and tried for heresy. I see nothing's changed for the women there, to be honest. We're still doing that today. And then she was, of course, burned at the stake at just 19 years old. I cannot imagine how terrifying that must have been. Honestly, 19-year-olds today claim they're experiencing complex trauma when a stranger disagrees with them online. They would not have been able to handle 1400s life. And that is not me dunking on 19-year-olds. I wouldn't be able to handle it either. But the good news is the church later admitted they shouldn't have burned Joan of Arc at the stake. Essentially they went, oh yeah, that was a bit bad of us, oops, and then they canonised her as a saint, and she's been an icon of courage ever since, although I personally reckon she might have preferred not being burned at the stake. I know I would. Here's the thing, right? Joan of Arc was undeniably a woman. She never questioned that. Her story has been documented in trial records, letters and first-hand accounts. She wore men's clothing, armour specifically, because she was a soldier in a brutal war in the 1400s. I don't think there was women's armour in the 1400s anyway, because women doing what Joan of Arc did was quite extraordinary. So I think it's more likely the reason that she wore men's armour because it's unlikely that there would have been women's armour, not because she's rejecting her biology. It's about practicality and common sense. And Joan of Arc did cut her hair short, probably for practical reasons more than anything else, such as to blend in with the men more so that she's not a sexual target, or to keep her hair out of the way of her eyes on a windy day. Think, guys, think. Practicality. But we all know in 2025 these absolute weirdos see a woman with short hair and try to claim she's a man. I get it all the time. All the time. These jealous, fat old men telling me I look like a man. I personally have been accused of appropriating non-binary culture just because I have short hair and wear glasses, not on screen obviously because it messes with my eyes. Do you know what else? It's okay to be a woman with short hair.
What was that?
What?
Joan of Arc ain't even here to speak for herself, so it's a bit bloody rude to be retrospectively deciding that she's part of a modern day prawn-obsessed death cult. So where did this even come from? We're in 2025 now, and some weirdos, usually academics or activists with an ideological agenda, point to Joan of Arc, in particular wearing men's armour and going, aha, gender norms were blurred, she must have been non-binary. These weirdos cherry-pick the detail, like her short hair or her refusal to act like a dainty medieval lady. And let's be honest, I'm not really sure how dainty medieval women really were, if we want to get into that sometime. And because of those things, because she were dainty, they're slapping a 21st century label on her as if they can judge her by today's standards. It's like saying Leonardo da Vinci was a vegan because he sketched plants. King codswallop. It's nonsense. Joan's own words from her trial transcripts are available for anyone to read. Amazing really that even back then everyone knew what a man and a woman is. She even called herself Jeannie La Pucelle, which translates to Joan the Maid. Honestly, I'm shit at French. And let's be honest though, maid isn't exactly an androgynous term. It means a young woman. Her enemies though did accuse her of cross-dressing to shame her, but she explained it was survival, wearing armour in battle and men's clothes in prison to protect herself from assault. Context matters. Why are you, hundreds of years later, shaming her? Now, why does it matter? Because some weirdos want this revisionist take to be taught in schools as a fact. Imagine telling kids that Joan of Arc, a historical female figure grounded in faith and grit, was actually a poster child for modern day queer theory or trans ideology, a porn-obsessed death cult. It's disrespectful. Joan didn't die for queer theory. She died for her country and her belief. Teaching kids these lies absolutely muddies history and ties it together with ideology, and that is not education, that is indoctrination. Kids should be learning exactly what happened to the best of our knowledge. Who Joan was, what she did, why she's remembered, not some trendy reinterpretation that fits today's narrative. History ain't a costume that we can just match up to the current approved fashionable ideas, and honestly, kids deserve so much better than to be academically malnourished by this rubbish junk food of indoctrination over education. They should be inspired by Joan's real story of courage, conviction, madness and sacrifice, not distracted by a fabricated fantasy. And if I haven't made it obvious by now, I think it's ridiculous. It's wrong. We shouldn't be lying to children on such a monumental scale. One teacher said the lesson plan used by state schools made an absolute mockery of the profession. In schools today, there is simply far too much identity-first woke reading materials being foisted on pupils at the expense of established classics like To Kill a Mockingbird or Of Mice and Men. We should also not lose sight of the fact that there are cohorts of teenagers vulnerable to reality-denying nonsense like this when it is presented earnestly. My favourite bit of the article at the end, it says, Collins was approached for comment. Obviously they didn't want to say nothing about this batshit crazy bollocks. What do you lot think? See you later.
Early in the morning, as the sun comes up, I just wanna have a cup. There's one drink, that's the one for me. Won't you please make me a cup of tea?